Hello and welcome back to another episode of I Read This Book. Today I am yet again so happy, so honored, so privileged to have Mr. Dhruv Nath join us for this episode. In this episode, we're going to discuss funding your startup and other nightmares. A book which Mr. Nath has written for the startup ecosystem exclusively because he believes in helping startup ecosystem, and he's been helping by being an active angel investor, an active community member, an active speaker, and an active champion of young startups in a lot of ways. And as you might see, this beautiful book has a foreword by Mr. Sanjeev Bichandani, who is, of course, a mentor and inspiration to everyone. And Mr. Deep Kalra has also written, a note of recommendation. So this is a beautiful book, and a very helpful book. And I'm so happy to have Mr. Nath join us. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Welcome, and it's great to be here.
So nice. Sir, I would want to begin by asking you about your motivation of penning this book down and collecting so much of information from so many entrepreneurs of different types. Tell me your process, sir. How did it go about it?
Okay, so firstly, I've been writing for a long time, whether it is articles, columns. This, by the way, is my fourth book, but the first one on startups. Now, for the last, I think, approximately 10 to 12 years, initially I spent about 20 years in the IT industry, and then I became a professor at MDI. And for the past approximately 10, 12 years, many of my students and past students, ex-students, alumni from MDI, they used to come to me, and they had either created a startup or they were planning to create one, and they wanted advice. So we would sit in the open air cafeteria in the MDI campus in Gurgaon, and we had a lot of fun. And I realized most of the issues, most of the questions, most of the problems that these guys were facing were common. And that's where it struck me. I said, look, I have learned a lot from all these people. I've learned a lot from spending time with them, learning about their problems, their startups. If I were to put down all this in the form of a book, then it doesn't just reach a person who, I mean, you don't have to sit in the open air canteen at MDI to listen to me or to talk to me. You read the book and you've got, what I wanted to say. So essentially, based on all these interactions I've had, where I've learned a hell of a lot, I've tried to put that in the form of a book. And that's the book you're holding.
That is the book I'm holding indeed. And as I said, this book is actually written like a tutorial. So sir is right. Sir has productized his conversations. In startup parlance, this is called productization. So he has productized those conversations so it doesn't become a service. And sir is an entrepreneurial mind, as you can see. So sir, let's talk about it. You chose the pain point, of course, of most startups, which is called funding, raising funding in different levels, in different ways, in different industries, and so on. So of course, I have read the stories that you mentioned, and I'm happy that you've also mentioned the stories which couldn't raise money. So at least people know, what went wrong or what went missing. So any story in particular from My Cute Office, Fashion Chat, Cashify, any story that you'd like to pick up on which is most interesting to you? What was?
So you want me to, so you want me to share that story?
Sir, we could discuss that story and learn the essence of the book because I wouldn't want to share the entire crux of the book. So I want people to read the book. So let's pick up the story which seems like most interesting to us, and then with that, we'll ask people to finally pick up the book.
Okay, fine. So I'll share the story. Maybe I think this is probably the second story in the book. It is called Squirrel.
Squirrel.
Right?
I get it. Yes.
Squirrel. But it is spelled SQRRL.
Yes. Yes.
There is
Yes.
no vowel
Yes.
because I don't know why, but the founder didn't want to use vowels. I don't know why. So it's an interesting story. And I'll just try and share with you the basis for the book. After having met so many of these founders, I realized many of them were success stories, and unfortunately, many of them were also failures. And what we realized was that between the success stories, there was a lot in common. So there
Mm-hmm.
were certain things that they had done, which most people had done. And similarly, the failures, again, there were certain things they had not done. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've tried to do in this book, along with my co-author Sushanto Mitra,
Mm-hmm.
is to create a framework for the book. And that framework, by the way, I call persistent. So I'll just show that to you.
Persistent. Absolutely.
Yeah, if you can see that
Yeah.
here.
PERSISTNT. So that
Correct.
is an abbreviation for a
Absolutely.
process of building a startup which increases your odds of getting funded and
That's right.
raising
That's
money
right.
for all the
So I'll
viewers.
I'll take it a step beyond that. Persistence is an acronym. You're right. Each letter of the word persist stands for something.
Mm.
And um, not only is it useful for funding, persistent is a model that you can use to ensure that your startup is successful.
Mm.
And any investor obviously would want to invest in a successful startup, right? So
That
he
is
will
true.
also look at the persistent model. So I'll just give you a couple of quick examples from the squirrel story.
Mm-hmm.
Squirrel basically is what? Squirrel tries to help young people,
Mm-hmm.
typically either in college or um, in their first job. They try and help them to save money, and they try and help them to save money by parking little bits of change. So 100 rupees a week, 200 rupees a week, 50 rupees a week. Because if you tell a person, look, you got to save 10,000 bucks,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nobody wants to save that kind of money. There are far too many temptations, isn't it? But
Mm-hmm.
if it is little bits, and that's the word he likes to use, if it is little bits squirreled away, then you successfully save money. So that is the squirrel model.
That's the squirrel
What
model.
this guy did, what the founders did was, they said, look, nobody is likely to pay for it. But what we will do is, having got savers on board, now we will offer them other financial products, such as buying an insurance product, investing in mutual funds, taking a loan, etc., etc., and we'll charge for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is the squirrel story. So I'll just take two, three pieces from this persistent model.
Mm-hmm.
So the first P in persistent stands for
Problem.
problem,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you're not solving a problem for some customer, he won't come to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you don't have a business. So
Mm-hmm.
clearly they were solving a problem where the guy was able to A, save money, and B, ultimately invest or buy mutual funds or take insurance or whatever, right? So clearly solving a problem. And it's all digital,
Mm-hmm.
all online. Second, if you look at E, the earnings model,
Earnings
right?
model. Yeah.
E stands for the earnings model. You can be solving a problem for somebody, but till he is willing to pay you for that, you don't have a business. You're
Mm-hmm.
running a charity, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, for helping people save,
Mm-hmm.
um, nobody was willing to pay. But for buying those other financial products, yes, they were willing to pay, right? So they had an earnings model. And I'll just take one more piece, which is one of the S's.
Mm-hmm.
There are two S's in persistent,
Mm.
which stands for scalability.
Scalability.
Now, just to clarify, you don't you want a startup which is able to grow rapidly,
Mm.
right? Because if you don't grow rapidly,
Mm-hmm.
the other guy, and you
Mm-hmm.
must remember, and anybody who's listening to this podcast must remember, your idea can never be unique. There'll be enough people in the country and perhaps in the world who'll have similar ideas. You don't grow fast, the other guy grows fast, eats into your market share, takes away your customers, kills you. Which is why growing rapidly becomes extremely important, and
Mm-hmm.
that is what I mean by scalability. So if you look at Squirrel, the big advantage of Squirrel is it's a pure digital offering, right? The moment you have lots of infrastructure, buildings, manpower, growth becomes slow because you can't recruit too many people at a shot, right? But if it's a digital thing, not dependent on people, then you can grow very, very rapidly, which actually Squirrel has done. So it's a very highly scalable business. So I've just taken three examples from Squirrel, but basically all the letters in the word persistent stand for something. And all the stories that we've talked about in the book are analyzed using persistent, including the failures. In fact, I would say it's very, very, very important to learn from failures.
That is true. Sir, I would like to ask, as a startup founder and as an entrepreneur, like, there are a lot of caveats to each model. Every pattern has it has an exception. Even in case of squirrel, the hypothesis that getting enough people having these using this free service and then being able to convince them to buy is is a hypothesis at the end of the day, right? It's not rock solid. So
Correct.
what was the founders because you probably knew founders, right? Squirrel. Yeah, so what were their defense? Because an entrepreneur with a similar idea can go to somebody and say that this is what actually happened with fashion chat in your book. So the
Correct.
girl said
Yes.
that I want to build a community of fashion dedicated to fashion, and then when I have a lot of people in that community, those people will obviously pay for different things. Maybe they could buy something, they could advertise, we could advertise, or whatever. So that is also a hypothesis. People
Correct.
choosing squirrel's hypothesis and not choosing fashion chat's hypothesis, do you think it's more of a founder's play? It's more of a connect play, network play, pedigree play, which comes into the equation? Or is it just like a equation? It's an abacus. What is it?
So actually, Nishant, it's many of these, but I'll give you the fundamental difference. The fundamental difference, and I'll have to take you back about 10 years in time. So about 10, 12 years ago, investors, particularly at the angel investor level, which is the earliest external investor in your company, apart from your friends and family, they would invest in good ideas. So, you have a bright idea, the investor says, wow, it makes sense, it's likely to catch on, and therefore I'm going to put in 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs or 20 or whatever. What has happened is many of these startups have failed. Some have succeeded, many have failed. And therefore, a lot of investors in the early days, I'm talking of India, although exactly the same thing would have happened in the US and Europe, let's say 20 years back. So a lot of early stage investors, angel investors, have lost money, right? Therefore, what has happened is they have changed their approach. They said, look, we will now not invest purely in ideas. We will invest in at least semi-proven businesses, right? And that's a fundamental shift.
Sir, but in these two examples, case in point, I do realize the beauty of traction. You've mentioned traction in the persistent framework.
Correct.
Traction is an important T, right? And that goes, but in Squirrel and in Fashion Chat, the traction was somewhat negligible. Both of those cases.
So let me explain. Let
Yeah.
me explain. In the case of Squirrel, see, traction means two things. Traction means A, getting customers, and these customers or users, and these customers grow month on month, and B, getting revenues, and that revenue also grows month on month, right? You can have traction purely in the form of users who are not paying yet,
Mm-hmm.
on the assumption that at some stage in the future, you'll be able to monetize these users,
Got
right?
it.
And you will be able to charge either them or charge advertising, charge for ads or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at Squirrel, the guys behind Squirrel realized this. The
Mm-hmm.
founders realized this. They said, okay, right now we will not go to any investor. And they actually put in a very sizable amount on their own, very significant amount. I think the figure was approximately 3 crores, which I mentioned in the book. Now,
Oh, so you didn't
the,
actually.
oh, I didn't.
Sizable,
Okay, so I've told you.
sizable was the yeah.
Yeah, so I've told you it's 3 crores.
Okay.
Anyway, so these guys put in this kind of money, and they said, since the investor may not be convinced as of now, we will use this to ramp up our traction dramatically.
Got
We
it.
don't have revenues. We don't
Mm.
expect revenues right now. We'll just ramp up active users, right? And they are savers. And initially, even for the paid products, we will not charge.
Mm-hmm.
So what these guys did was, using this huge amount of money that they had, they ramped up dramatically. And once they had done that, and these guys had a lot of experience, then investors said, okay, you have shown that this business is viable, it is, it can grow. And since you have a lot of a very large user base right now, we expect that you will be able to monetize it at some stage, and therefore they got investment. So they actually got $1 million, which is 7 crores,
Mhm.
right?
And
In
the
the
fact
case of
that they had
fashion chat,
invested 3 crores is huge.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that's
yes.
also very big.
So yeah, so in the case of fashion chat, that hadn't happened. They had a product, but
Hmm.
they had actually gone to the market, to the investors, to ask them to give them money to grow.
Hmm.
These guys said, we'll prove that we are growing, and then we go for money.
Hmm.
And therefore, for that initial growth, we'll put in our own money. So, the situation over the past 10 years has changed quite a bit. Today, you need to look at other sources of funding
Hmm.
uh, to prove that your business is viable. You can't tell the investor, look, I don't know whether my business is viable. I think it will be, but give me the money, I'll try and prove it. Investors have too many choices today. So they are not likely to put money into that. So initially, you'll have to look at other sources, which typically is, family, friends, incubators can give you money and so on.
Got it. So do you think it would have been helpful if you had mentioned these cold hard numbers in the book? I don't know why you chose to not do that, because even in the funding cases where people have gotten funding, you didn't mention the specifics. Like you mentioned $1 million, 7 crores, but at what dilution, and so on. You've like consciously, I've read throughout the book, consciously avoided those numbers. Why is that, sir?
Yeah. See, you must remember the world of startups. This is private equity,
Mm-hmm.
right? These are not listed companies.
They are
And
not.
a lot of this information is private, right? So, in fact, in all cases where I have named the founder, see, in many cases, I have not named the founder. For example, Fashion Chat, I've changed it was a man originally, I've changed it to a woman, and, I've given her a different name and so on.
Oh,
There,
okay.
I have no problem. Yeah, originally it was a man. I mentioned that somewhere, the fact that, failures,
Mhm.
in many cases, it is not fair to talk about failures and actually name people. In
Mhm.
two cases, Quaco and Grey Meter, if you
Yeah.
remember from the book,
Mhm.
they were people who told me we have no problem, take our names. So there
Mhm.
I've taken names, but
Mhm.
otherwise I've hidden names, right?
Okay.
So, you know, given the fact that it is confidential information, it is not publicly available. I used to ask people, look, do you want me to share this? They said, no, don't. In your talks, you can, but not in the book, which is why I've kept it confidential.
Yeah, and that seems a little counterintuitive because we read about these things very commonly
Yeah,
a
but
lot. Yeah, yeah.
I'll tell you why. See, you read about these things, I'll tell you why. You will typically read about them. See, what do you read about? You will normally read about guys who are raising, let's say, $20 million or $15 million, guys who are unicorns, almost unicorns. These guys, even though they're not listed, so guys like Grofers, guys like Big Basket, guys like Byju's, etc.
Mhm.
Even though they're not listed, there is enough evidence
Scrutiny.
for people, correct, to say, look, they have raised so much and the rough valuation is so much. So it's
Mhm.
publicly known for all
Mhm.
practical purposes. The
Mhm.
startups I have spoken about are chotu startups. They're
Mhm.
young startups, right?
Mhm.
They are not in the public domain yet.
Mhm.
And therefore, unless the founder is willing to, put up all his data there,
Mhm.
it's not fair to give those figures. Yes, if tomorrow, newspapers start talking about Squirrel and say, look, they've raised so much, sure, I'll mention that figure.
You will. I mean, does that, as a writer, as an author, as a person who's trying to teach, and you do teach, so you are an educator as well. Did you feel limited while you were writing the book? Because this is critical information, right?
Not really, because see, I'm not. I mean, the exact figures are not really important. Whether you raise $1 million or $500,000,
No, sir.
right?
Actually,
That's not really relevant.
my contest to that is my concern with that, because a lot of startups, and you've dedicated a chapter to it. Actually, don't worry about the valuation. but
Correct.
people do worry about so
Yeah.
people do worry about a valuation, as you might know.
Yeah.
And their
You're right.
first
You're right.
fundraise or the first fundraise, the major concern is the dilution. Because I was talking to Mr. Hitesh Oberoi,
Yeah.
one day, and he told me that, people raise like 1 crores and 1.5 crores on 20% because they don't know. So
Correct.
from his perspective, diluting 20% on a 1 CR, 1.5 CR round was diluting too much. But
Absolutely.
a Garib guy, will be happy to dilute 20% because, if he reads that, don't worry about the valuation. That whole 1% of billion is more than 100% of nothing, and that perspective kicks in. So don't you think that this is like a very critical part of the puzzle, that how much to dilute and what percentage and
Yeah.
stuff like that? Yeah.
So by the way, so I actually you asked me two questions. One is you've talked about don't worry about valuation, and the other one was have why don't I mention the exact amount that was raised? Right. So two different things. I'll just
Yes.
talk about these separately.
Yes, sir.
Let me tackle the second part first.
Yes, sir.
So I agree 800% with Hitesh.
Mhm,
Absolutely valid.
mhm.
In fact, that is, I have mentioned that somewhere in one of these later chapters.
Mhm.
See, what am I trying to say there? What I'm trying to say is, and I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example from another startup that I have invested in.
Mhm.
It's a startup called Planet Spark.
Planet
Okay,
Spark.
and it is not there in the book.
It's
It may
not.
come in my next book. It may come in my next book. Yeah,
Fingers
it
crossed.
probably will. Right? So these guys, they wanted to raise a fair amount. I think it was a few crores. I don't remember exactly how much,
Mhm,
but at a very early stage, and they went to an angel network, and the angel network said, "Look, you are asking for a valuation of 10 crores. Sorry, we can't give you more than 3 crores."
mhm,
Okay. Now, obviously, there was a lot of hemming and hawing and negotiation and so on, but the network said, sorry, it can't be more than 3 crores. Now, if you are raising a few crores, even if it is one or two, at a valuation of 3 crores, you've already diluted at least
30%.
25%, yeah,
Mhm,
30, maybe 40, depending on how much you're raising.
mhm,
And which means, A, your shareholding has come down dramatically, and B, the next round of funding will be very, very tough because the next investor will say, boss, your
mhm,
skin in the game is too low. I'm not
mhm.
willing to invest in a founder who has such a low stake in the business, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not a good idea.
Mhm,
However, if you need money to grow, you need money to grow, right? For example, if you're in a B2C business, right, you need money to grow, you need marketing spend, right, you need money to pay salaries. So what these guys did was they toned down dramatically the amount they wanted to raise because they realized they wouldn't get more than 3 crores, sorry, 3 crores of
of
valuation,
valuation.
free money,
Yeah. Mhm,
right? So they toned it down dramatically to, I don't remember how much it was. I think it was 50, 75 lakhs,
mhm,
which means they diluted only about less than 20%, less than 20. Earlier, it would have been 40%
mhm,
from the earlier demand.
mhm,
That was a very, very smart thing to do because using that smaller amount,
mhm,
they were able to grow dramatically. They went back to the market and got money at a significantly higher valuation. In fact, they did that twice, right? So the point is, if you need the money to grow, but you're getting a low valuation, don't say, I will not take the money because then you will not grow. And the other guy who's taken the money will grow, right? Take less. So you may not have a runway for 2 years. You may not have a runway for 1.5 years. Doesn't matter. Have a runway for 8 months, 10 months. Take a small amount at low valuation, use that to grow, go back to the market, get more money at a higher valuation. That's what I mean when I say don't worry about valuation. Yes, try and get the best you can, but don't say, look, sorry, this is peanuts, this valuation, I will not raise money. Because then the other guy is going to kill you, right?
So,
So that's really what I mean.
thank you so much, sir. That's a very good answer. So my question is, with the advent of a recent flush in the whole micro VC environment, so there's a lot of micro VCs coming in, and one of my friends got funded like 550K, and it's just a 6 months old startup. They just, you know, uh, would does this make life harder for angel investors in any way? I mean,
I don't,
when companies can
I
go
don't
for
think
these
so.
micro VCs, and because they are better with valuations. Angels, like you said, talk about 3 CR valuation pre-money or 2 CR valuation pre-money. In this range, I've seen, and or maybe 5 CR. But micro VCs are a bit futuristic with their time horizon is better. So as you said, you take runway for 6 to 8 months, 10 months, and then grow again. But founders say that it's very hard to raise money in such quick succession. So it makes sense to raise money for 18 months and then go forward, instead of raising money for, let's say, 6 to 8 months and then be stuck for money and then just die. So does this make life harder for angel investors, the advent of micro VC revolution in a way?
Okay, no, not really.
Okay.
So first of all, you must see angels. I'm not saying angels will only raise money at 3 crores valuation. In my experience, so I'm part of lead angels,
Mm-hmm.
and we have seen angels investing at 20 crores, 30 crores, even 100 crores. So there is no hard and fast rule which says that you will only invest at low valuation. It depends on the state of the company. It depends on your revenues. It depends on the growth you're getting. It depends on the, how futuristic your business is. If you are in a unique space, if you are essentially what I call a category creator, which means uh, you're the first business in that space. You're the first startup in that space, and that is likely to be a growing space. Sure, angels are very happy to invest at a higher valuation, and most of our investments are typically in the valuation range of, I would say, between 10 and 25 crores. Right? That three was just an example that I took. So that is issue number one. Secondly, valuation is valuation irrespective of whether it's a micro VC or an angel investor, right? Valuation is valuation. Angels, see, the micro VC will look at a futuristic thing, so will an angel. So they are actually, they're in the same space and they're not competing with each other. There are enough opportunities to fund. If it is, so I'll give you an example. There was a recent company which came to us. I forget the name of the company, but they were into
Mm-hmm. Okay.
video commerce, right?
Yeah.
And the
Same space
guy,
like Bulbul, Sim, that kind of a space.
slightly different, slightly
Okay.
different,
Okay. Okay.
slightly different.
All right.
So these guys were at a very, very early stage. They had only 2 months of, I think,
Experience.
operations. Yeah,
Okay.
2 months of operation. But everybody said, boss, this is the future.
Mm-hmm.
Video commerce is likely to be the future. We will pump in money. And I think they got a valuation of about 12 crores, if I remember right, in spite of only 2 months of operations.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm trying to say is micro VCs and angels will think in a similar way. Both
Mm-hmm.
are futuristic. Even the angel knows he's not going to get anything back in 2 years. They are prepared to wait for 4, 5 years, 6 years. That's not an issue. And the micro VC, in fact, the micro VC has a is in a tougher environment because please remember one very important thing. The angel is investing his own money.
Yeah, yeah. You
The
mentioned this
micro
in the
VC
book.
is investing, correct, somebody else's
Okay.
money, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the micro VC, when he raises a fund or a
Mm-hmm.
VC, micro VC, whatever,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
essentially he's got a time period. So
Yeah.
he's raised money for, let's say, 6 years or 5 years or 7 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the angel, since it is his own money, it doesn't matter,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the micro VC is under pressure to take bets.
Mm-hmm.
The angel is not under pressure. So actually, I mean, there is no, micro VCs don't cause any problems to angel and vice versa.
That's one statement you said, sir, echoes what I heard from Mr. Bichandani, where he said that InfoEdge doesn't invest at other people's money. So we have a horizon
Correct.
of, let's say, 20 years. We can wait for a
Yes.
company to grow in 20 years. But
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's very
Yes.
nice.
Yes. And by the way, some angels also do that because they want to be part of the company. For example, whenever I've invested, I do not want to exit because, it's like it's my company.
Mhm.
I own a stake in that company. I would like to make that company grow. I would like to see it grow. I'd like to be involved. Why
Mhm.
should I exit? I don't want to exit. So many angels think like this now.
That's very good to know. About valuation, sir. Valuation is always so in this. I hope the startup ecosystem, because a lot of people who watch this are building companies, trying to build companies, thinking of building companies. So I hope we covered an example of squirrel. We also talked about the psychology of angels, micro VCs. Now we're going to come up, we also talked about dilution a bit. Now we're going to drill down on the valuation bit, sir. Sir, valuation is a very, very subjective thing, is what I believe. A lot of people rationalize it by saying that no, metrics matter, and traction matters. But I have seen companies with questionable metrics getting funded, and no complaints, and nobody is complaining here. It's just a fact that things differ for different people. Not two people are same. So what do you think changes companies valuation? Is it pedigree? Are the founders pedigrees important? Connections are important? What changes the valuation game for you, sir,
Okay. So,
as an investor and as an observer of
yeah,
the startup ecosystem?
so you're absolutely right. I think let me just take 2 minutes to explain to your audience why valuations are so subjective. Is that okay? Shall I take 2 minutes? Yeah.
Please, sir. 20.
Okay. 20. Okay. Okay. Then you have to send me lunch.
Oh, I will, sir.
Dunzo. Dunzo.
No. Okay, so I might like to plug in here. Spot Health even has cloud kitchens running, sir. Active, healthy cloud kitchens. Though we
No,
don't
no, no.
deliver in
That's
your
a
area, but
no. That's a joke. That's a joke. Okay.
Same here.
Okay. So, so first of all, let's understand why this is so such a cloudy area, such a hugely fuzzy area, valuations in startups.
Mhm.
Let me take the example of, so first of all, if you look at typical formulae, typical conventional methods of uh, figuring out the valuation of a company, there
Mhm.
are several methods, and the most common one which people use is what we call the DCF, which stands
Discounting
for
cash
discounted
flows.
cash
Cash
flow,
flows.
right?
Yeah.
In very simple terms, for those who are not, those who don't have a background in finance, in very, very simple terms, what that means is, see, you are basically trying to look at profits,
Mhm.
because ultimately you want the company to give you profits, and those profits should grow year on year, right? So what you try and do in DCF is you try and project future profits. So next year you'll get so much, year after that so much, year after that so much. So maybe for 3 or 5 years. And then you use a formula which is applied to those future profits, and that gives you the valuation. Now, if you look at a company like Hindustan Lever,
Mhm.
okay, or take HDFC Bank. HDFC Bank is about 25 years old,
Mhm.
right? And for years and years, they have been growing at least 16 to 70% profit year on year, right?
Mhm.
So it is fairly reasonable to assume that they will continue to grow at least by the same amount every year, which is about 16%, right?
Mhm.
Similarly, you look at Hindustan Lever, it is probably a century-old company, right?
Mhm.
And they have been growing by between 12 and 15% per year in terms of profit average, right?
Mhm.
Some years a little lower, some years a little higher. So once again, it's fair to assume that in the future also they will grow by at least about 12%, right, per
Mhm.
year. And therefore the formula is easy to apply. Now you come to a startup. The startup has a past of, let's say, 3 months of operation. Remember, I told you about that video commerce guy, two
Yeah, yeah.
months of operation, right?
Mhm.
How the hell do you project 2 months of past into the next 5 years or 3 years?
Mhm.
You can't. There's no way you can, right?
Mhm.
Some startups have come to us and they have had zero operational experience. They've come with a product and a pilot.
Mhm.
How do you project revenues and profits for the next 3 years? You can't, right?
Mhm.
So that's the problem. Startups have no past or very little past. Therefore, projecting their figures into the next 3 years, 5 years is meaningless,
Mhm.
which is why you cannot use formula. Right?
Mhm.
The other issue there is startups can change direction. I mean,
Mhm.
you don't know what will ultimately work out. You may have to pivot your
Mhm.
business model, right? So what you think is going to happen in the next 3 years may not happen because
Mhm.
you've changed direction. So the problem is applying any formula in the case of startups is absolutely meaningless.
Mhm.
So normally what people do is they use thumb rules. And you typically use a combination of thumb rules, right? So I'll give you a couple of thumb rules right now. One, which I mentioned in the book, is, if you have, if you're very early stage with maybe a paid pilot, you'll typically get a valuation of somewhere between 3 and 5 crores, right? Typical. I'm just giving you typical figures. If you have some revenues, you go up to about 10. Significant revenues can take you well beyond 10. Right?
What do you mean by significant revenue, sir? In
Yeah,
lakhs?
again, it depends. Yeah, it depends on the kind of startup you have. So, for example, for instance, if you have, let's say you're in a business where your gross margins are very low, right? Let's say you have an e-commerce site
Mhm.
and you're buying stuff from, or you're getting vendors to sell to your B2C customers, and you're taking a margin of, let's say, 10%.
10%, yeah.
Let's take an example,
So the
right?
gross is
10%.
10,
It's
net is
very,
very low.
yes, right?
Mm.
So the gross margin is only 10%, which means you need much higher revenues.
Mhm.
Typically, I would say, for the investor to get interested, and therefore for the startup to get into this 5 to 10 range, you would normally need, uh, with decent gross margins, an annualized turnover of about a crore, which means a monthly turnover of about 7 to 8 lakhs, right? But if your gross margin is low, which it was in this case, then you need, let's say, about 25 to 30 lakhs monthly, and you have to show growth for the guy to get interested and to give you valuations in that range.
So a
But like
crore
I told you,
of annual revenues is being
yeah,
traded at a multiple of 10, essentially, which is for a
annualized,
listed company.
annualized,
Annualized, yeah.
annualized,
Yeah.
annualized, and it's. I'm assuming here that your gross margins are reasonably high. So something like, where you're offering services. Services companies normally gross margins are much higher
Yeah.
because they don't have bought outs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas the e-commerce kind of company I spoke about,
Yeah.
or a distributor,
Mhm.
gross margins are very, very low.
Yeah. So
But like I said,
essentially, a
these are the
crore of a turnover, a yearly turnover is giving up
no annualized, which means
annualized.
today, correct.
Yeah.
Today you may be doing 7 lakhs. You
Yeah.
may have done 5 lakhs in the previous month and 3 lakhs, but
Uh-huh.
that 7 lakhs will take you times 12
Mm-hmm.
to almost a crore. So
Yeah.
that's okay. Right?
And then
Then
the
there are other.
multiple is 10 because the valuation
I'm
is
just I'm just giving you a sense, a very, very rough
a sense.
sense, right?
Okay. Okay.
Very,
Got
very
it.
rough.
Got it. Got it.
Then it will depend on many other factors,
Many
and
other
you rightly
factors.
mentioned some of them. For example, if you are in a space which is very, very crowded, right,
Mm-hmm.
lots of competitors, you will get a lower valuation. In fact, you may not even get funding at all.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a space, or if you have a business model where you have no entry barrier,
Mm-hmm.
you can't keep out competitors, highly copyable,
Mm-hmm.
lower valuation. If your founders are highly experienced in that field, higher valuation, right? If you're in a futuristic technology, so let's say if you're doing something with blockchain,
Mm-hmm.
and very, very important that blockchain is relevant to the business. It's
Mm-hmm.
not being brought in purely to increase the valuation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Then yes, you will get a higher valuation, right?
Okay.
If you have if the founders come from, yes, unfortunately it is true, if they come from, let's say, IITs or IIMs, it
Mm-hmm.
makes a bit of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
If these guys have already a past history of having created a startup
Mm-hmm.
and selling it off and
Mm-hmm.
making money for their investors, again valuation goes up, right? So there are many factors. Ultimately, Nishant, it's a negotiation game. And
Yeah.
I'll give you a simple example of how it works.
Mm-hmm.
It is slightly far-fetched, but it's an example of how it works. Two founders, two investors sit down in a coffee shop, or maybe in a bar, right? Let's say coffee shop. Okay? चार मग कॉफी के सामने हिंदी ओके
Of
हिंदी
course, sir.
ओके ओके
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल
सो
sir.
4 मग कॉफी के ठीक है
जी sir.
and the uh, the founder says, look sir, we have done all this, and we have a good solid entry barrier, we have traction, etc., etc., and we have used things like discounted cash flow, so we expect a valuation of 12 crores.
Mm-hmm.
So the founder says, बेटा तू कॉफी पी ले 3 से ज्यादा नहीं मिलने वाले.
Investor says.
हाँ, sorry, the investor says. So found, nahi sir, please. Sir, nahi sir, 3 nahi sir. Sir, I mean, We've done so much. Please look at all our calculations. Sir, this guy got 12 crores.
Mhm.
अच्छा सर 11 तो मान जाओ
Mhm.
बेटा 3 से 3.25 कर दूंगा उससे एक पैसा ज्यादा नहीं हो सकता and they'll give reasons and 2 hours that damn negotiation will continue. Ultimately they'll agree on some figure, whatever that is, maybe 5, maybe 6, whatever it is. So ultimately boss, it's a negotiation game, it's a demand and supply game.
It's a people's
If
game.
And it's a demand and supply game, you know. If so there's a guy, I remember, he came to us. It was another video commerce thing. We were very keen to invest, but he was being chased by a lot of investors. So he named the valuation, he refused to bring it down. We thought it was high, but he got money because there
Mhm.
was a lot of demand.
Mhm.
Whereas where there is not enough demand for the business you're in, you'll get a low valuation. Maybe you'll not get any money at all. So it depends on many, many, many factors. In fact, maybe one of the future possibilities is to write a book on this subject. It is such a, it is such a fuzzy subject.
Absolutely, sir. I've read, I mean, I have at least 5 books on this subject: Mastering the VC Game, Venture Deals, Angel Investor. So, a lot of books on the front, and you've written this in the book itself, that you will find a lot of books on this subject uh, from the West. But West operates very differently from India. India works very, very uniquely, at least how people behave, how people react to you, how you're supposed to talk to people is extremely different on how, as to how you were supposed to do that in the West. So this book makes it very contextual. So I hope with this conversation, all the aspiring entrepreneurs learned something. Sir was very candid. He has already given us so much of his time, and so we won't push him any further. And this, I would request you to read the book. Sir, my last question and my last request
Sure,
would be, which is like a
sure.
tradition of this podcast, is that you please, if you were to gift this book to somebody, what would you say if you had not written
It'll,
it? It's not your book,
oh,
but
oh,
you're,
okay.
yeah, you're just, yes.
I think the first thing I will say, the one thing I will say definitely is there are two parts. One part is hackneyed. It's very useful for any founder. But the second part is it's also fun to read. It's bedtime reading, and start reading it at night and you'll probably finish it by the morning, which some people already have.
I did so as well.
Oh,
it
okay.
it, it took me
Good.
it took me like 8 hours max.
Okay. See, I
So
believe very strongly, Nishant, and this is true of all my 4 books so far. If it is fun to write, it's
mhm.
fun to read. My books are fun to write. I remember one of my books, I was doing a project in Egypt and I was sitting in Cairo and there was a hotel bang on the Nile, right? And I was on the 13th floor. I was on my laptop. I could look down and see the Nile flowing. Itna maza aa raha tha. And I was writing humorous stuff, right? So it's fun to write. It'll be fun to read. And I don't want to write stupid textbooks. I don't want to write stuff which, are 600 pages and font size zero point 0.3. No, boring to read. It has to be fun to read. And obviously, it should be useful.
Absolutely, and so sweet. So I will also give a passing remark to this book. If you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to raise money or you're trying to build your startup, you need to know how the community of investors talks and works and thinks. And you will not get that insight easily because people like Mr. Dhruv Nath are talking to me right now. It's my privilege, but they are essentially very, very tough to get in touch with, generally speaking. And I know this by experience. So please read this book and you will get a very, very clear understanding of how people operate in general. When I say people, the people who invest and support startups at the very, very early stages. So it's an important book. Uh, so it's not a textbook, but please treat it like it and read it. That would be my
So
passing.
just to add to that, Nishant, I'm actually not very difficult to catch. In fact, anybody who wants is welcome to, my email ID is given there. Plus, catch me on LinkedIn. A lot of people who read my book have communicated with me and I've been mentoring them. And it's a lot of fun. And I learn a lot from all these young founders. Plus, once COVID is over, I'm very happy to treat all these guys to coffee and sign the book. but after COVID.
So sweet. With this, we'll wind up the episode, sir. Thank you so much for your time, for your sweet conversation, for your congeniality, and I hope everybody gets to learn a lot from it. Signing off.